Turning to Israeli-Palestinian issues, Secretary Kerry launched an effort and believed that it was possible that he could bring some kind of agreement between Palestinians and Israelis. It is said that you were right there in the middle of that you were there both advising, encouraging, a central part of it. Why did it fail?
Well, it hasn't failed yet. It's still an ongoing issue. The door is still open. And I think, if you remember, there was a trilateral meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu, myself, and Secretary Kerry about 10 days ago, which was a very successful meeting. President Sisi called in, and we had about an hour conversation between the four of us on how to move things forward.
No, this was Secretary Kerry, you,
President Sisi, and Netanyahu.
Okay, President of Israel.
Yes, and on how to move forward and the necessity to move the Israeli-Palestinian issue forward, especially when all of us are dealing now with a much bigger problem, which is this international fight against international jihadists. So the world has moved on, but if we don't unravel and solve this problem between the Israelis and Palestinians, we're really going to be fighting this problem with one arm tied behind our back. So how critical it is for the Israelis and Palestinians to be able to move forward. Secretary Kerry has some ideas. There are things that were discussed between...
Well, what progress did it make? I mean, clearly Secretary Kerry was very, very passionate about trying to keep quiet what the deal was, because he believed if it was given, people would start picking at it. What was the essence of the deal?
I can't. Obviously, we were part of the process, because when it comes to final status issues, just about every single final status issue has something to do with Jordan, whether it's the border, whether it's Jerusalem, whether it's refugees. So this is why we were actually in a fortunate position of being able to help both sides overcome a lot of the obstacles. And as a result, for the first time, I think in the dialogue of the peace process, for them to having to talk to the Jordanians meant how serious it was, and how serious the process was, and how close we got to what is actually a very strong final package. For several reasons, we didn't manage to take the final step.
What are the reasons?
Both sides had their concerns.
Trust.
Trust is part of it. But I think they're back to hopefully overcoming that at the beginning of the year. There are issues that are being talked about, so we're keeping our fingers crossed. So
there's still possibilities within the remaining term of the Obama administration?
And has to be, because what happens if there's not? And I think this is the critical factor that both sides have to understand. We're now moving on to something much bigger, which is the global fight, this generational fight. If this thing is still cooking and not resolved, how are we ever going to succeed on this larger problem? So why is it now that all these governments around the world are sort of either indirectly recognizing the state of Israel, the state of Palestine, or saying that in a year or two, if you don't solve the problem, we're going to recognize the state of Palestine? Because of the foreign fighter problem that all these countries are having around the world, they're beginning to realize that all roads do lead to Jerusalem. And that if the Israelis and Palestinians don't solve this problem, it does have an effect with extremism and how it affects the Muslim populations in that country. That at the end of the day, the core issue is still the Israeli-Palestinian problem and Jerusalem, even though certain people don't like a reference made to that. You know, whether it's true or not, that argument is still being used by the extremists, and countries around the world realize that they have to solve the problem for their benefit. So it's no longer politics because of Middle East. It now affects the national security of countries around the world.
So they have a large incentive now to push for.
Yes, so in other words, Israelis and Palestinians, for our sake, says countries around the world, solve the problem because it's affecting us.
Their argument is made that in the end, Israelis didn't win the Gaza war because of the repercussions of it.
I think from that point of view, you're correct. And if you looked at all the media outlets, the international media outlets during the summer, especially if you looked at maybe not America, but if you looked at most of the international outlets that you think would be covering Ukraine as the head story, especially in Europe, they were not covering Ukraine. All the headlines was Gaza. So the attention has shifted. The understanding and the concerns are the core issue today. And so that has to be an understanding by the two players that we've all moved on to something bigger. And if you don't get it, we're all going to pay the price for it.
So what does you know well and have many discussions, including the one you mentioned, with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Does he get it? Did he get it that in your judgment, all the things you have laid out here, that the world has changed, there's a bigger issue, there's a time demand, and these countries are saying you got to solve this. Does he get it? Does he feel that in your judgment?
I can say that the conversation, the four-way conversation between President Sisi, myself, Secretary Kerry, and Prime Minister Netanyahu it went on, I mean, Sisi called it was an hour four-way conversation, and it was a really optimistic, sincere conversation, and one that left me with a lot of hope. And the way that everybody was talking about the problem made me feel that they wanted to move forward.
Okay, hope is not a precious commodity, and you don't see a lot of it these days. What was it that made it hopeful?
Understanding how it affects, and also what I think Israelis need to understand is how, if this continues to go on, because now we've all moved off to another bigger problem, how this continues then to affect the Israeli-Jordanian relationship, the Egyptian-Israeli relationship. Because if this thing continues to create a turmoil, it does create tremendous pressures on Jordan and Israel and Egypt. And so I think there was a tremendous understanding that we have to move the process forward. And I think everybody left that meeting feeling optimistic and I think geared up to take it to the next level.
Have you seen any change since then? Has it been
No. I think, I mean, the feedback we got from both the Egyptians and the Israelis and the Palestinians. I mean, you're going to have different maneuverings by different groups, and there are different things that come up, whether it's the new Israeli bill or different initiatives.
What do you make of the new Israeli bill, by the way?
It definitely complicates things after we've come out of that wonderful evening.
So you came out of the meeting hopeful, and then you have this vote.
That makes things more complicated. But again, I'm looking to beginning of the year. Some of the things that were said at the dinner, Secretary Kerry coming back with the next phase of getting them together. So what I'll say is I'll give everybody the benefit of the doubt, keep my fingers crossed, and see what happens.
You worry about a third intifada?
Oh no, if you don't do it, there'll be a fifth, sixth, or seventh. There'll be another war in Lebanon. I mean, you could predict it. There is a reason why our military field hospital is still in Gaza, and we've kept it there since War I. Because if you don't solve the problem, it's only a matter of time until there's another one.
Did you recall your ambassador to Israel?
We called him back for questioning, and that was after 2 years of going back and forth on difficulties and issues that we had in Jerusalem vis-a-vis Al-Aqsa compound, and not being able to get proper responses on how to deal with the issues. Make a long story short, during the Gaza war, I did speak to the Prime Minister saying, look, this is really, really serious. We've talked about this on several occasions. If it continues like this, I'm going to have to take action. Action, unfortunately, due to an incident, was taken. The Prime Minister called me the next day after we took that decision. But with all sincerity, he said, listen, we need to de-escalate the tension. We created a set of procedures to make sure that things moved in the right direction. And since then, by the way, we've had the best Fridays of any Fridays in the past 15, almost 20 years in Jerusalem. So there is a willingness and sincerity on all sides to move the process forward. There is calm on Fridays, and there is procedures being put into place. We hope that once the procedures are all finalized, then the ambassador will go back.